We are all decorated for Christmas, and we are singing carols today. And Christmas is an incredible season to celebrate. It is just a fantastic occasion that we have for joy and to be happy. The appearing of God's Son Jesus into our world, bearing flesh, was the most remarkable thing that had ever happened in history. And his arrival was the best news of all time to a world that really needed it, to a world that was dark and hopeless and painful. And as we go through this season together as a church, we'll get to look at these characters in the Christmas story and see kind of how they were processing this news. What they were declaring had happened at that moment when God sent his son, born of a virgin in Bethlehem. And through the story, you'll see that they are certain. All these characters in the Christmas story are just very certain that on Christmas, some incredible promises were going to be fulfilled. Promises from God for things like justice and joy, for changed hearts, for peace and salvation. All through the story, they are declaring that these things were arriving now. Be it Zechariah or Mary or the angels, this is what they were saying on Christmas, that these things are here. But I want to point out something to you now that should be obvious. These Christmas characters in the Bible who tell us about the wonderful news of Christmas woke up the day after Christmas in a world largely without justice, without joy, without changed hearts for God's people, without peace. Despite their certainty that these things were going to arrive or be accomplished by God, they still lived in a world where those promises were unfulfilled. And every year that we celebrate Christmas, we find ourselves in the same spot, doing the same kind of thing. When we celebrate the advent of God's Son, we proclaim that through him, through Jesus, God will deliver justice and peace, redemption and joy. But we do so from a world that sure needs a lot more justice. We do so from a world that is not yet full of peace. We do so from lives where joy is not all that we feel. In fact, Christmas can be a very hard time emotionally when we are struggling, when we are going through difficult times, when we have suffered loss or when we are experiencing difficulty, because we know that this is a season of joy and it's a season of celebration because of what God has done through his son Jesus. But sometimes more than others, we're painfully aware that our world and our lives, sometimes our bodies, aren't experiencing the good things that we're supposed to be celebrating. There's a dissonance there. Maybe that's the case for you this Christmas season. Maybe as we go to this time of celebration and you see these decorations, maybe you're aware that you've gone through a very difficult circumstance that has brought sadness or worry. Maybe you're here today knowing that things aren't going right now in your life and it's causing you stress and anxiety. There are things that make joy seem very far away from you at this moment. Here's what I want you to know. Christmas is not the arrival of the fulfillment of these promises. Christmas is the arrival of the certainty that those promises will one day be fulfilled. Let me relate it to a modern situation that you're probably familiar with. I have Amazon Prime. Anybody else in here? I bet more families have Prime in this room than don't have Prime. It is an incredibly fun thing to have, to be able to select almost any item and have it be in your house in a couple days. We actually have it pretty rough out here in the boonies. I don't know if you guys know this, but the people who live in the cities, they can get it the same day sometimes. They can get it the very next day. They can say, do you want this before noon? They have to say yes or no, you know? We don't get that out here. We get, 2 days and we're feeling like that's kind of lightning fast, right? But I order stuff on Amazon all the time. I see the UPS driver more than my wife some weeks. And so this is just how I live. But I know all the time, when I place an order for something on Amazon, they will tell me right away, even before I check out, what day it'll be to my house. They're not always right. In fact, they're wrong more than I am about the outcome of Husker games. It'll tell you, like, hey, this order's getting ready. It'll tell you it is shipped, and you're still, okay, whatever. You'll go online. You can look and see you can look at the tracking history and see, excuse me, the shipment progress. And, you can see, oh, my stuff is in Kansas City. And, if it's UPS, it'll be here tomorrow. And if it's USPS, it might be here next month, right? And you can see these things. But there are different stages, Your order is received, it's shipped, it's in transit. But then there's a good one. Right before you get the product, it says it's out for delivery. Right? And then when it says out for delivery, you're pretty sure it's going to be there. You can even go into that shipment progress, and you can even see what time they put it on the delivery truck sometimes. And that's a good feeling. Like, I know this UPS driver, who is pretty close to my best friend at this point, has it, and he's pretty good about getting it to me. This happened to me at church camp once. I showed up at church camp planning to do a night activity where we play glow-in-the-dark ultimate frisbee, which is one of my favorite games. I do it all the time. But I brought my frisbee to camp, and it has a little button in the middle that you push, and then it lights up. It glows in the dark. We can play glow-in-the-dark ultimate frisbee. But I remember getting there, and Sunday night, hitting the button, and nothing happening. I'm thinking, I'm in trouble. What am I going to do? This is one of my night activities for the week, so I rearranged things a little bit. But I still needed to do this game, so I went on Amazon and I ordered a frisbee and I had it shipped to camp. It said it'd be here Wednesday. It's like, okay. I'm not sure that I trust them that it would be here Wednesday, but I'll tentatively plan to do that. And so we're doing camp, and then Wednesday comes, and I'm up, before the campers, and I'm looking through my schedule, and I see tonight we're supposed to play glow-in-the-dark ultimate frisbee, but I don't have this frisbee in my hand yet. But I go online and look, and I go in the Amazon app, and I see this frisbee is out for delivery. It was loaded on the truck at 5 a.m. It says it'll be there by 4. Right? And when I read that, then I'm really sure that I'm going to have that frisbee. And so I can do the whole rest of my day knowing that I'm going to have something to do tonight, because if that frisbee doesn't arrive, I'm going to have 60 really bored kids for a couple hours at night. That's not a good situation, right? Mischief tends to happen when you don't schedule them enough fun things to do, right? And so I really need this to come through for me, but because I see it's out for delivery, I'm just sure. I know it's going to be there. And there's no twist to this story. The frisbee arrives on time. We play ultimate frisbee. It wasn't the year we gave Autumn a concussion. It was a different one. And so that it all worked out fine. I planned on it. I didn't have a backup option. I didn't need one. I knew it was certain I was going to have that. I had enough reason for certainty. Even though I didn't have the frisbee yet, I had every good reason to trust that it was coming, so I could live my life according to the fact that it was going to be there. That's what Christmas is for us. It's not the arrival of the fulfillment of God's promises. It is the arrival of the certainty that God's promises are going to be fulfilled. The world wasn't suddenly filled with peace on Christmas morning. That's not the way it worked. Just because Jesus arrived doesn't mean that all the things that we're celebrating in the Christmas story and at the Christmas season became true at that moment. Everyone's grief was not suddenly transformed into joy. Justice was not handed out to all people on December 25th, 0 AD. So then what are we so happy about? We're happy because with the arrival of God's Son Jesus at Christmas, we now have certainty that those promises are out for delivery. We now have certainty that these things that we are promised, we are going to receive. So now we can live like we've got them in our hand, even though they're not here yet. Celebrating Christmas does not mean that everything in your life is good right now. That's not true for me at this moment. Is it true for you? Probably not. Celebrating Christmas means rejoicing over the fact that one day it will all be good. One day, I know I will never feel pain or get sick again. One day, I know we will never be mistreated or mistreat others. One day, I know I will feel joy all by itself. And I know it because I have seen the glory of God in the face of Christ Jesus, his Son, who he sent for our redemption on Christmas. At Christmas, we get the certainty that those promises will come true. In fact, I know these promises so certainly that I can live today, I can live this week, even through pain and injustice and strife, I can live according to those promises over which I am certain. There is a word for this kind of certainty in the Bible, and that word is faith. And today, as we look at that word, I'd like you to open to Hebrews 11 with me. Here I want to show you what living in the certainty of God's promises, even before they arrive, what that looks like. So in Hebrews 11, teacher tells them about faith. In Hebrews 11:1, he says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for." Okay? So we talked about how at Christmas we don't have the reality itself as having arrived yet. We have the certainty that that reality will arrive. Okay, that's what we're given with Jesus. That's the gift that he's given us, is the certainty that these promises that God has made will come true. Without Jesus, that was unclear. Without Jesus, there was no means apparent to us about how God was going to accomplish these promises he had made. At Christmas, that changes. At Christmas, we receive God's Son made flesh. We receive all of a sudden this instrument by which God could accomplish what he had promised all along. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. So when we talk about living that reality, what we're talking about is the word faith. Is confidence that God's promises will come true. This assurance that what God has promised will be fulfilled. It's something that happens in our head. And that's kind of the point made in verse 3 as we read on here. It says in verse 3, "By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible." So here's an example here, talking about faith. It says, by faith we understand, okay, so it's something that's happening in our head, that something we can't see, like how the earth was made, by faith, something that we can't see, we trust is true. That God made this world. And now, excuse me, now the teacher has established this in Hebrews 11, he's going to go on to how those people, how these characters in the Old Testament that we're going to talk about here soon, how they live out this confidence that they have in their head in their lives. And so here we're going to get to see the relationship a little bit between faith and behavior, okay? Because you can say all day long that you believe something, but if it doesn't manifest in your life in the way that you live, then you probably don't. Look at what faith does in these people's lives, starting in verse 4. It says, "By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place that he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land. Like a stranger in a foreign country, he lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise, for he was looking forward to the city which foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. I want to take a minute to talk about Sarah here a little bit in what we read about her. By faith, Sarah, it says in verse 11, by faith, Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. Here was this woman, well past childbearing age, knowing that she is unable to bear children. But look at the process she goes through. She trusts the promise that God had made, even over the realities of her physical world, which she could see and experience. God had made this promise to her that she would bear a son, and she considered him faithful. Look at that, the mental process going on there. She considered him faithful. She put her trust in the promises that God had made over what she could see and what that evidence told her about the world. She trusted God's promises over that, and because of that, she was enabled to bear children. Again, these are examples of what faith looks like, what it does in people's lives. When you have the certainty that God's promises will be fulfilled, it affects the way that you live. And those accounts of how it affects the way that it lived continue in verse 13, where it says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. Here's another one I want to highlight, because the Old Testament story doesn't really tell us what's going on in Abraham's head when this happens. When God tells him to offer his only son, the one that Sarah was waiting for, the fulfillment of that promise, God tells him to offer Isaac as a sacrifice, and Abraham is willing to do it. God stops him. If you're not familiar with the Old Testament story, God stops him before he does sacrifice his son. But we see here in verse 19 that Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so that's why he was willing to do what he was going to do. It is a mental process of certainty, being so sure that what God says is going to come true, that you're willing to live in a way as though it already is. That you're willing to trust with your actions and your behaviors that these promises are going to be fulfilled. In verse 20, it continues, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regards to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. All these people who are so certain about what God has told them that they do things that seem really strange to everyone else, that they act in ways that are unexpected to the world. They're willing to act in ways that seem contrary to the evidence or conditions of the world because they have certainty in their mind that God's promises to them will be fulfilled. And the teacher in Hebrews goes on to explain that we are in a so much better position than them because they had to place their hope on something they had not seen. Meaning Jesus had not yet come, but we get to place our faith, our hope, in something that we have seen. In Jesus, God's Son, who has come to earth. So faith is about looking ahead. And this experience that I'm inviting you to have this Christmas is to be someone who looks ahead with the certainty of knowing that God's promises for you are going to come true, and to do so in such a way that you can start living them out right now. To do so in a way that can take that reality that is coming and put it to work in your life, in your family, in the way that you think and speak and act. Faith is acting on the unseen reality that was promised. And that's what we get to do at Christmas. At Christmas, we receive the certainty that God's promises will be fulfilled. And if you are really certain, if you really do believe it in your mind, if you really have faith in those promises, you will live like they are true. That is what it means to have faith. We are still waiting for the things that the characters in the Christmas story proclaim have come with Jesus to come true. We are still waiting for the world to be filled with peace, for God's justice to arrive, for us to experience joy alone. We are still waiting for God's people to have totally changed hearts. We're waiting for these things, but it doesn't mean that Christmas was unsuccessful. And if you carry a heavy heart into this season, if you carry struggles in your life into this time, it doesn't mean that Christmas is not for you. Christmas is about the certainty that God's promises will one day be fulfilled. About a certainty that can be so strong for us, so reliable, that we can start living its reality right now. As followers of Christ, we must be living right now the promises that are out for delivery. We have to face our world with faith by living out the realities of Jesus, even in a world where they do not yet fit. So this Christmas season, when you face hardship, when we face sadness, when we see the brokenness of our world, the way things are misarranged in our world and in our families and in our lives by sin, face all of that knowing that God's promises to you are certain. Knowing that because of Jesus' arrival, that we can live in righteousness, that we can live according to God's promises because they are as certain to us as a sunrise tomorrow. Let's pray. God, thank you for your incredible promises to us. Thank you for the certain hope we have. God, that you will bring peace to our world, to our lives. God, that you will exercise justice over the wicked. God, that you will save us through the work of your Son, Jesus. God, help us to trust in those promises. Help us to let them just soak into our mind and our soul so that we can walk forward into our dark world in faith, acting according to your promises, not according to our dark world. God, just give us clarity in our mind through your Spirit so that we can live that way, the way of faith. I pray these things in your name. Amen.